Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Tires for Overlanding, where we discuss vehicle preparation and treading lightly. For vehicle preparation, there's a few things that we want to keep in mind, starting with the ABCs. First, we need to have aids for navigation, and that can include a traditional GPS unit like this Garmin. But then we want to have a secondary means of navigation, which can be our smartphone with GPS-enabled apps, or we can have a tablet that's also been GPS-enabled. Those apps allow us to have additional map layers and detail that we can use for research and redundancy. But then we also need to have a contingency. What happens if all of those devices stop working or they run out of power? That's when we go back to a traditional paper map and guidebooks along with a mechanical compass. So the B of our ABCs is basic emergency supplies. I like to keep all of those within a bug out bag or a ditch bag like this unit that I have here. Inside of that, we're going to want to have some shelter. We're also going to want to have our emergency medical kit. I also bring along some water and just a few high protein bars that I can have in the case of emergency. But inside of that is where we also want to keep our basic backup communication devices, which we're going to talk about in a second. The C of our ABCs is communication in the backcountry. And this is when we get outside of cellular connectivity. So for that, we want to have a cell phone that has SOS-enabled satellite communication, like the new iPhone. So that can be our primary means of communication. If we have cell coverage, that's great. And if not, we still have a way to identify that it's an emergency. But then we want to have a secondary means of communication. And that's when I like to use something like a Garmin inReach or some other satellite-based messenger. It's really important that it's two-way communication. That way you can let people know what it is that you need. Maybe all that's required is an additional spare tire, or you need some fuel because you've run out of gas. The other tools you can use for that is something like Starlink, or in this case, which is an Iridium Go Executive, and this allows for even internet connectivity, so you can download emails. You can even send photos of what might be broken on the vehicle. We always need to have a contingency plan for communication, and that's when traditional ham radios can be useful, using a repeater or skipping off of the ionosphere. But then we can also use traditional devices, analog devices like a signaling mirror or smoke signals. We always want to have the ABCs covered, but it's also a good idea to have other essential items along with us, which we recommend. And when that starts off with a basic toolkit and spares. We want to have a high quality toolkit along with us that we've used back when we're at home to actually conduct repairs and maintenance on the vehicle to make sure that we have the right sizes along with us. We also need to bring along spares like belts and hoses and filters. We need to have some basic understanding of how to do those things and make sure that we have the tools along to do the job. The next essential item that we need to have along is recovery gear. So we need to have a recovery kit that's rated to the vehicle and the types of recoveries that we might expect. This particular Jeep also has a 12-volt mounted winch, so we need to have additional items in the recovery kit that can support winching operations as well. So we use a heavy-duty kit like this one from American Expedition Vehicles, which we showed in the previous episode. It's also important that we check to make sure that we have gross vehicle weight-rated recovery points on the four-wheel drive that we're driving. We want to make sure that the manufacturer has either provided those or we've added those with aftermarket components. The next thing on our list is high-quality tires. We've been talking about this essential item for decades because it is the one item on the vehicle that is constantly in contact with the terrain. So the thing that's most likely to happen on the trail is a flat tire. So if we start off by fitting high-quality LT tires with a 2 or 3 ply sidewall, then we're going to reduce the likelihood of having a puncture. So if the vehicle doesn't come from the factory with a high quality tire like an LT, we're going to want to fit those with the aftermarket. And that can be an all-terrain, an XT hybrid tire, or a mud terrain tire. In addition to having those high quality tires, we also need to have a way to air them down, like the Indeflate system that we've been using over the last couple episodes. But then we also need to have a way to inflate the tires at the end of the day. Now, if we do get a flat, it's typically going to be a simple puncture from a stick or a nail or a stone. And that can be repaired with a tire puncture repair kit in the field. So one of the ways that we can be prepared is selecting the correct tires for travel. With overlanding, we're exposed to so many different types of terrains, and that's when something like this new class of tire that we call a hybrid or an XT tire is really appropriate. And that's because it's a balance between a mud tire and an all-terrain. So with that extra spacing between the side lugs, you're going to get a little bit better mechanical keying and mud and stone ejection when you're on the trail. So using this Hankook Dynapro XT as an example tire, we can see that compared to an all-terrain, there's a lot more lug spacing on the side lugs. The side lugs are also chamfered for stone ejection. There's also a mud evacuation and stone evacuation rib here between the lugs. But where an XT starts to differentiate itself from an MT is the fact that we're seeing a lot more siping on the tire. So this is a full length sipe that runs from the side lug, which is going to improve wet weather traction on the rock and on the pavement. But then when we look at the center section of the tire, we see a closer lug spacing than we would see on a typical mud tire. And that's going to reduce road noise. It's also going to improve fuel economy and efficiency when going down the highway. And these closer lug spacings are also going to improve traction on the pavement, both in wet and dry conditions. As we demonstrated in driving in the sand and the dunes, vehicle situations can be quite dynamic. And because of that, we always want to ensure that all of this heavy componentry is properly loaded and lashed in the vehicle, which means putting the heavy items as far forward and as down low as possible, and then lash properly. We never want to use bungee cords for that. We want to use proper ratcheting straps or cam straps to make sure that nothing moves. The last item on our essentials list is basic camping gear. You never know when you find that perfect campsite overlooking a beautiful vista and you want to make camp for the night. But there's also scenarios that can occur where you're driving late into the evening and you just need to get some rest. Or you find that you want to stay camping for a couple more days. So having those essential items with you will allow you to adapt based on the scenario. For this kit, we bring along a Pelican case, and inside of it we have a sleeping bag, a sleeping pad, and a tent. So we talked a lot about tires, but one of the most important things we can do as overlanders is to preserve these beautiful locations like where we're at here in southern Utah for future generations. And that includes treading lightly and also leaving no trace. For treading lightly, we want to start off by educating ourselves. So for example, avoiding things like cryptobiotic soil, how to use our locking differentials and how to air down. We also want to respect the rights of others. So we want to give people their space when we're in the backcountry. It's also really important that we do our part. So that means that we need to be collecting trash. We need to be taking trash away from these locations that we're visiting. And we really want to avoid sensitive areas, which means staying on the trail. Don't widen the trail. If the campsite is only set up for 1 or 2 vehicles and you have 3 or 4 in your party, move on to the next campsite. Those are the ways that we preserve these trails for future use.